graduation from law school, she worked at Kirkland and Ellis and Associate, which is a big law firm. So she's also had sort of the big law firm experience, for better or for worse. She'll let us know in her remarks. So with that, I'm very grateful that Rebecca drove down in the snow from Salt Lake and is able to join our class. Thank you.
We'll see if you're still applauding when I'm done rambling. This could be a little bit boring. So, been introduced. My name's Rebecca, and they've asked me today, kind of given me an outline, first to talk about my industry, and I'm going to approach that as sort of the legal industry in general. I am a specialist. I specialize in employee benefits law, and I don't anticipate that will be helpful for any of you, maybe one or two. So I'm going to approach that from a higher level perspective. And then they've also asked me to tell you a little bit about my own career path and then close by sharing some advice. And I understand a lot of you are interested in law school. I'd encourage you now to think twice. It's an incredible education, and I loved Byu Law School. A lot of you have heard that you can do anything with a law degree. And I would say that is in some cases true, and it's both a blessing and a curse, because law school, as some of you may know, gives you a very general education. Your analytical skills are sharpened. That's really what they focus on, is analysis, thinking, and being able to communicate concisely. So there's a big emphasis on writing. Before I went to law school, I loved creative writing, tinkered with some poetry, and I got to law school and was sort of killed for that, because they'll cross out anything that's flowery or creative. They want you to be very concise and very clear. And I think that's actually a skill that I developed in law school that served me well in everything I've done, whether that's teaching Sunday school or working at the big law firm, or even now where I'm not writing as much. Any email or any memo I put together, there's a benefit from my law school education. So in that sense, I think law school is a good education for everyone. I think one of the cons of law school is that in some ways it is so general. You get out of law school and go, so what's next? Do I specialize? They don't really teach you what to do or say in court at law school, or how to fill out legal documents. A lot of my colleagues and I got out of law school and went, I don't know how to do this. I have a general perspective on law, but I don't have any immediately applicable skills. But again, that gives you a lot of opportunities and a lot of options. So I kind of wanted to run through some of those options as you graduate with a law degree. There are some that I think are very obvious, like working with a judge or in sort of the judicial system, and a lot of law firm attorneys. But there are some options that I didn't know about and I think are especially attractive to political science majors because they're government related, but there's some sort of hidden gems as far as legal employment go that are often overlooked. So of course, when you graduate from law school, you can go to a law firm. Law firms range in size from massive international law firms with thousands of attorneys, offices all over the country, mid-size, small, and in some cases solo practitioners that we call it hanging out their own shingle, and they just sort of wing it and figure out how to represent different clients as they go. Those are actually some of the attorneys I respect the most because they're flexible, they're generalist, and they just figure it out as they go. I spent some time at one of the largest law firms in the country doing mergers and acquisitions. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But there really is sort of a law firm culture. Often law firms will divide into the corporate side of things, which is more paper-pushing contracts, business-related law, and then there's litigation. I found that the personality types in each one of those practice areas are very different. So it's something to consider if you're going to law school. I think throughout the process, look at your personality, look at your strengths, and kind of try to tailor your education to, I think, where you want to end up. I'm already giving advice. Also, there are the law firms, but then there are the in-house counsel jobs, and that's currently what I'm doing. I'm an attorney that represents a company. I don't deal with clients outside of my company. For those who've been in law firms, they're considered the cushy jobs because you have one client, you're not billing time, and you have a better work-life balance. And then I think some of the hidden gems are the government jobs. More locally and probably on a smaller scale, there are the cities, the counties that all need attorneys. My brother's an attorney for Salt Lake City, and he gets to work with a real interesting variety of issues. If there's any litigation, if they have contract disputes, He goes to city council meetings and helps draft city ordinances. He was involved a few years ago, there was actually one of those carriage horses that died downtown, and the animal rights activists got involved. It was his job to draft a city ordinance that protected the carriage horses to make these animal rights activists happy. Not what you'd expect in your day-to-day attorney job, so he's really enjoyed the variety. I think those are jobs that people sometimes overlook because we're so focused on the judicial or on the law firm. Also, I spent about 6 years in DC, and while I was in DC, I really got to see how many legal jobs are driven by the government. Obviously, as political science majors, you'll be tuned into the legislative jobs. There are a lot of attorneys on Capitol Hill that work as legislative assistants to senators, to representatives. They go in as the experts, and when there's a bill coming up, they consult directly with the senator or representative and give advice. Generally, they're not practicing law, but they're involved in the policy aspect. They do a lot of writing, they do a lot of analysis, and a lot of interaction. Those are generally really highly sought after jobs. I think especially coming out of school, people want to be on the Hill. There's a lot of energy, there's intensity, it's cutting edge. Also on the Hill, there are attorneys on the committees. For example, I have a couple of friends, one from the Democrat side, one from the Republican side, that work on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. They're both pension specialists that advise the whole committee on drafting, reviewing, revising, and making recommendations on legislation. They love their jobs. They love the policy aspect, and they've combined that with true legal practice. Again, they're tricky jobs to get, especially if you don't have an in on the Hill, which is, I think, where the internships, the Washington Seminar Program, is an amazing resource. But something to start thinking about if you want to head out to DC, definitely would encourage internships and developing those relationships. Another interesting part of the law where there are a lot of attorneys is actually for the administrative agencies, the Department of Labor, the Department of Health, Department of Transportation, Department of Justice. When I graduated from law school, I was oblivious to the government sector, especially the administrative side. And in my work, again, I'm an employee benefits retirement plan specialist. I work with the Department of Labor consistently. And those attorneys, I have several friends there, they actually get to draft the regulations that govern how the law is applied. There's a lot of legal compliance. So they draft these regulations, they meet with people in the industry to evaluate the compliance. They do audits. There's some litigation if there are compliance problems. There's actually a lot of legal work that goes on there that I didn't know anything about. There are actually some government job websites that you can go directly to and search for entry-level legal jobs. And so that's something, whether or not you have a specialty you're interested in, if you do go to law school, I would consider the agency jobs because they're actually very substantive, interesting legal work, but they're also not focused on billable hours. So if you're interested in having a life, government is a great area to look into. Of course, there's also the lobbyists in DC that support the legislative process, and something, again, I was unaware of called trade associations. And you may all be more on top of this than I was years ago. But the trade associations are companies that essentially represent an industry, and they have members. An example is the American Petroleum Institute. My uncle works there in DC, and he is responsible for essentially representing the interests of oil and gas nationally and internationally. So as you can imagine, there is a lot of money that flows through these trade associations, but they sort of compile all the interests and then go up to the Hill and represent that industry. So they really, again, are on the cutting edge of influencing policy, influencing legislation. It's a lot about relationships, but it's also, there's a lot of legal component and a lot of policy and analysis. Very interesting jobs. I think those take a lot of networking, and in some cases, and this is where I think a law degree can be challenging, you're so much of a generalist, you do need to develop some area of expertise. And that's something I'd also like to talk about. In the legal world, there are all sorts of specialties. Again, I'm an employee benefits attorney. I have friends who are intellectual property experts, trusts and estates, Native American law, medical malpractice. There is just a real variety of areas that you specialize in. I get a lot of questions from friends, often about divorce. custody battles, landlord-tenant disputes. It's kind of like asking a podiatrist to diagnose a heart problem, because I look at them and say, if you have a problem with your 401k, I can help. If not, you need to go talk to a family law attorney. There are some generalist practitioners in the legal world, but often you will end up specializing. And if that's something you have strong feelings about, if there's an area that you're passionate about, I'm a little envious. It took me a long time to sort of find my niche in a lot of different areas that I explored. But specializing has been a really good experience for me. There are a couple of other areas legally that I think are worth highlighting. There's, of course, academia. I have friends who are law professors. But another interesting spin on this, I have friends who graduated from law school and became legal librarians. Legal research is a bit of an art form, and so they have become specialists in research. They love their jobs, they work with different issues, and they have a lot of variety. Not something I'd ever heard about in law school, but they're very happy people. And finally, there are some, I call them the legal free spirits. I had a roommate who was obsessed with the Constitution, but there really aren't that many jobs working on the Constitution, researching the Constitution. And so she created her own job. She's become an international religious freedom expert that flies around helping countries draft constitutions. And as part of that, she created her own nonprofit, which essentially she researched the Constitution and resources across the country and contacted libraries, historical societies that had these documents and put them into an electronic database. So she went out and created her own job. There are a lot of opportunities if you can find sort of an angle or a passion that drives you. And before I move on, I know time flies, just wanted to mention a factor in the legal profession that many of you are probably aware of, and it's the lifestyle that comes along with different legal jobs. I was at a big firm, and you've probably seen TV shows, heard horror stories, and I can say most of them are true. I was billing probably 80 hours a week, having conference calls on Christmas, canceled vacations, canceled family time. There are some cons to the big firm lifestyle, but there are also a lot of pros. For example, I worked with some of the most high-profile mergers and acquisitions that went on in the country while I was at that law firm. I worked with incredible professionals that expected perfection in everything I did. It's nerve-wracking and it creates a lot of stress, but I walked out of that law firm with an incredible level of professional experience. I'd worked with the best and people that really took their careers seriously. I think that's a real benefit, and it's trickled down through the rest of my career. So it comes with pros and cons. The salaries at the big firms are definitely higher, and there's kind of a scale as you work down. My friends who are in the government jobs are actually very happy. They have good, solid salaries, but they also have a work-life balance. They tend to work more than 9 to 5, which I think most attorneys will. There's always more to do than you can get done, and it's really rare that you totally leave your work at home. But I think the government jobs are a really good balance, as are some of the small and mid-sized firms. So it really depends on the type of experience you want and your priorities. I know some people have managed to successfully balance family and work life, but it is a bigger challenge when you're at the firms or at the in-house counsel jobs. Those can also be demanding. So kind of wanted to give you that overview. And I'll probably talk a little bit about my personal career path. Like I think most of you, I started out at BYU undergrad in political science. I'd always been interested in politics, civic issues, and then I went to my second semester here, I went to the BYU Jerusalem program. Vividly remember watching women and children in Egypt begging, severe birth defects, dumpster diving, and I was really impacted by that. So I came back and changed my major to social work, thinking I would save the world. But I was still interested in politics, and so I signed up for the Washington Seminar Program. I spent, I think, a spring and a summer back in Senator Hatch's office. Didn't really have a choice about which topic I was assigned to, but I ended up in the natural resources group and had an amazing mentor. He kind of got that I was a bit of a geek and I was really wrapped up in the DC experience. So I'd research committee meetings that I wanted to attend, and I asked him questions, and I'd stay late and we'd go to receptions. But I really got part of that DC experience, and as soon as he picked up on the fact that I would go above and beyond, he let me write speeches, he let me draft parts of legislation. I had an amazing experience, and I got really hooked on DC. I came back home, still pretty convinced I wanted to deal with social work issues, but I'd planned to go back to DC, get a job on the Hill, and work in the policy area, changing the world on the Hill. Ended up going on a mission, and then I came back from my mission and finished my social work experience. As part of the program here, you have to do an internship. So they set me up with I think it's the 4th District Juvenile Court that's just over in Provo. And I worked with kids in the drug court program and also in sort of a first offender diversion unit program, and had a really mixed experience. I think that taught me I didn't necessarily want to be a social worker, which when you're about to graduate leaves you in kind of an interesting position. So when I graduated, I had applied to Columbia University for a master's in social work. I'd applied to the BYU Public Policy program because I knew I really wanted to, I think, get more education, the type of work I wanted to do. I felt like I needed another degree, that a bachelor's wasn't going to cut it. And so I was deciding between staying in Utah, public policy, and going to New York and doing social work. And my brother at the time was in the law school across the street. No plans to go to law school, no interest in being an attorney. And I walked into the law school, and I'm not typically a very in tune person, and I had an overwhelming impression that that's where I would be in a year. And it really stunned me, partially because BYU Law School is very difficult to get into. I hadn't planned on it. I hadn't taken classes to prepare for it. And so I withdrew my application, my acceptance. I told Columbia and BYU I wasn't coming for master's programs, and I had a year off. I took the LSAT and had to wait to apply to the law school. I thought, what am I going to do with the next year? So I took a couple of econ classes, thinking, see if I like the policy. This was in preparation for my public policy master's. So I was taking those classes up at the BYU Extension in Salt Lake, and I thought, I'm going to call the governor's office and just volunteer. So I called the governor's office. They don't have, back then at least, it's been years, they didn't have an established internship program. They told me, you're overqualified, you'll be bored, we don't have anything for you to do. I said, that's okay. I want some experience. So I went up there a couple times a week, and by then I'd finished my classes, and it was just kind of killing time till law school started. That volunteer experience turned into a full-time job with the State of Utah Olympic officer. They needed an intern one day to help stuff envelopes. I hit it off with the office, and they made me a full-time job offer. So I spent the next year working with state officials to stage the Salt Lake Olympics. And it was amazing, unplanned, but that experience came from a volunteer experience. I didn't plan that, I didn't, plot that out. It just sort of happened because I was willing to volunteer and to make those connections. After that, I went to BYU Law School and had a phenomenal experience. Law school, I'm sure you've heard, is really tough. It's very stressful, and you are thrown into a very competitive environment, but I loved it. I loved BYU, and I feel like I got an education that competes with any Ivy League school. Once I got to the big firm and was working with Ivy League students, at first I was very intimidated. I had, Columbia and Harvard and Yale and Princeton colleagues in my summer associate class, and I don't know if I can keep up with these guys. And by the end of the summer, I'd realized that not only was I willing to work harder, I didn't necessarily have the Ivy League laurels that I was resting on, but I easily kept up. I think my education had prepared me to do just as well, if not better. And so as a plug for BYU Law School, it is an incredible education in a very unique environment that you won't find at a lot of other law schools. Even I think the relationships and the closeness I had to my classmates is very hard to find anywhere else. So that's my plug for BYU. Happy to answer other questions after. As part of my law school experience, my first summer it's really hard to get a job as a first-year law student because you really don't know enough to contribute much. Maybe the top 5% of your law school class your first summer gets a paid job. And so I thought, what am I going to do? I need a meaningful internship. And again, as part of that volunteer experience at the governor's office, I'd worked with high-level state employees for a year. While I was there, I met Justice Wilkins at the Utah Supreme Court. He was someone that I called up, said, I need an internship. Do you have room in your chambers? And so he invited me to come for the summer, and I helped research one of the cases that he was working on. I got to sit through hearings. I spent a lot of time with the law clerks and just had a generally amazing experience. It did convince me that litigation was not for me. Not at all interested in the court side of the legal world. I'm more of a contracts, a corporate person. So I sit behind my desk and I deal with papers. But it was good for me to have that experience to figure that out. And I'm a big proponent of internships. Obviously, they've opened doors for me, but they've also given me a chance to try things out and to see if I really like the law, if I like social work, if I wanted to be on the Hill. So that, again, is part of my advice. I really would encourage you to take the chance to volunteer, sort of create your own opportunities as you go, and it may turn you in directions that you hadn't anticipated, but often those are some of the best for us. After my first summer of law school, I went back, and that's when they start to have the on-campus interviews where all of the firms come and interview prospective law students for summer jobs. And by your second summer, if you land a law firm position, just as a temporary summer associate, usually that means you'll get a job offer. So, 1 year into law school, you're starting to lock down your job. It comes at you a little bit fast, because by then you still really don't know what you want to do. You've had some basic classes. I applied to most of the law firms in Salt Lake and randomly to a law firm in Chicago. I had never been to Chicago. I didn't know anything about the city. And to be honest, I hadn't researched the law firm. I served my mission in Poland, where and in Chicago, there's a huge Polish-speaking population. And so I thought, why not go hang out with the Polish people for a summer, get great legal education? I didn't expect I'd ever hear back from them. Long story short, I landed the job in Chicago and found out it was one of the biggest firms in the nation. This is where I'm, I think, being safe from myself, which is a lot of, again, my experience is if we're in tune and trying to create our own opportunities, we're often directed, even despite opportunities we would have otherwise missed. And I think this was the case for me. So I spent the summer in Chicago at this huge law firm with Ivy League students. And there I really wanted to get a sense of law firm life. And I met he's a senior partner in the tax group there, and he's LDS. So I went in, introduced myself. We had, some things in common, and we went to lunch a few times. At the end of my summer, he said, I'd recommend that you look into a specialty area. And he recommended the employee benefits group. And he said, as a specialist, you have more control of your life. You have more opportunities to go in-house later because you have a very specialized skill set. And here, your lifestyle will be better because the corporate attorneys are on call 24 hours a day. And so I took his advice. I tried a couple of projects and accepted an offer to be an employee benefits associate after law school. So I went back my third year knowing I had a job set for me, which was a big relief. And right after law school, I moved to Chicago. Really didn't know anyone in the city. Found a little studio apartment and was immediately sucked into big firm life. Again, I've sort of mentioned some of the horror stories. It really was an amazing professional experience. As a young associate, you really don't get a lot of substance. I spent hours in document rooms, and this dates me because I'm sure now it's all electronic. I doubt you fly all over the country and look through papers and sit in awful, boring conference rooms. But that's what I did. For about a year and a half, I read documents and wrote summaries of contracts, of employee benefit structures. Essentially, I was reading contracts to see if there was any problem or any clause that would blow up a merger and acquisition. And it wasn't necessarily the most exciting work, but it was a very exciting work environment. It was fast-paced. Back then, budgets were not an issue. I think legal salaries were higher. And that's when, the mergers and acquisitions were just unstoppable. Really high energy, but I slept with my BlackBerry. I slept at the office. And so it was a really intense environment. About that, I guess about 2 years into my experience there, I was burning out, was really tired, had no life, no personal life. And I'd canceled a vacation to London. And one of my obsessions is international travel. Wow, I'm running out of time. And so a recruiter called. One of the advantages of going to a larger firm is that you constantly have recruiters calling that will help you jump to smaller firms or different firms. And they find a lot of very unhappy associates. And so I think it was a Friday night, a recruiter from DC called and said, "You're a specialist. I have an opening. Would you be interested?" 2 weeks later, I was driving to DC. And I jumped to a smaller law firm. It's a boutique firm, so it's really specialized. It is probably the best in the country for employee benefits. And I thought it was going to be a great experience. He pitched it as a lifestyle firm, meaning I'd have fewer hours, less expectations, less stress. And I do remember, I think my first week sitting in my office going, I may as well be in Chicago. This is the same thing. But I decided to stick it out, see what happened. By then I was pretty sure I was not a long-term law firm attorney, partially because of the hours, I never figured out how to balance that work-life, social life thing. And I ended up in the pension group, which meant I focused on pension investments. And there are a lot of legislative and regulatory agency rules that govern pension investments. It's a very technical, very dry area. And I was pretty miserable doing pension investments, 70 hours a week, no real social life. And that's about the time the economy dipped. Was that 2010? Several of our clients imploded because they were all invested in the market, and they laid off a bunch of associates. And I was one of those associates. I vividly remember going into that meeting knowing what was coming, and I remember walking out and being so relieved that I'd been cut loose. I think a few months later I started to panic, but it really was, again, I think there are milestones in my life where there's been some intervention, and I had been so miserable for so long, but in my mind I could not walk away from a career path I was dedicated to. I felt really stuck. And so they gave me a nice severance package, so I took about a year off, and I decided to reinvent myself. I traveled, it's one of the things I love to do, but I also spent a lot of time reading books. I hired a life coach, because I was really serious about reinventing myself, and I knew I didn't want to go back to a law firm. I thought I hated employee benefits, and at that point I really thought I have messed up my career. I've spent 7 years plus law school, and I hate what I'm doing. And so I started volunteering again at conferences. I attended meetings and lectures. I spent hours on resume boards, not even necessarily applying, just looking at things that sparked my interest. And then about 9 months after I was laid off, I volunteered at an international development conference because I thought I love to travel, I love international issues, this could be a good fit for me. And I went and really had no idea what they were talking about. I looked at some of the job openings and thought, I don't fit this. There's no way I can transition from employee benefits law to international development. I gave a couple of people copies of my resume, talked to a few people at the conference, and didn't think anything would come of it. A week later, I got a call from a man I talked to at the conference, and he said, well, why don't you come in and let's talk, and I can help you make this jump. So I went in and walked out with a job offer. He told me wonderful things about this small business that was doubling in size, and I was really excited to jump into international development. As it turns out, once I got there, realized that it was not necessarily international development. It was a government contractor, meaning they take government money and essentially hire people the government wants to send overseas. So I wouldn't be doing anything international. I was a little disillusioned at this point, but I thought, I'm going to make the most of this and develop new skills. And I'd gone from being a managed commodity at the law firm where there was always a senior partner, if not a senior associate, telling me what to do, how to do it, when to do it, how many billable hours. I'd been very strictly managed my whole career, and then I was thrown into this small business, which was a zoo. It was amazing. No management, no directives, no real job description. And it was really overwhelming to me not to have that structure. And again, I thought, I have destroyed my career. What have I done? I'm never going to recover from this. But I decided to, dig in till I could find a new job. And I look back at that and realize I developed a whole new skill set from that weird little detour on my resume. I went from being a managed commodity to having to come up with my own ideas, my own solutions, to implement those, to encourage people to implement those solutions with me. And at the time, I never realized what was happening, but it built my confidence in myself because I was no longer being directed every step of the way. But I really thought that I had destroyed my career. And I started looking for jobs. I actually had a couple of other job offers all over the country that I found on websites, through connections, but nothing really felt right. And then, am I still good on time? Okay. My mother called. I'd been in Chicago and DC for about 8 years. My whole family lives here in the Salt Lake area. And she called and said, "We found the perfect job posting for you on KSL.com. I thought, really? You've got to be kidding me, because I didn't want to leave DC. I love DC. And when I looked at it, it's an employee benefits legal job at Deseret Mutual. I thought, I don't want to do benefits again. I hated benefits. But I love my mother, and so I said, I'll fill it out. Logged in, looked at it. It was due the next morning. So I stayed up most of the night, did my resume, and sent it off. And most of you have heard it's not that effective to just sort of send resumes in to online job postings. I didn't think I'd hear back. A month later, I get a phone call inviting me for a phone interview. And the job was for a healthcare associate, or an in-house counsel that does healthcare, health insurance. I don't know anything about health insurance. I thought, why are they calling me? I do have the employee benefits background. So we had a couple of phone interviews, and I thought, I may actually get this job offer, and then what am I going to do? But it turns out when they called me, they said, we really liked you. We think you'd be a good fit, but you don't have the background. And we found someone who has a better background. And I was surprised at how disappointed I was to get that call. And in kind of an uncharacteristic moment, surprised it came out of my mouth, I said, well, keep me in mind. If anything else opens up, I really liked you. I liked the organization. I'd be interested in joining. And I didn't think anything of it. Kept going on in my crazy small business environment. 2 months later, I got an email saying, can we call you, from Deseret Mutual. This is weird. So we had a phone call. Their retirement person had decided to go on a mission. And so the perfect job for my skill set had opened up. 2 weeks later, still with some major questions, I was driving across the country to take this job in Salt Lake City. And it has been an incredible move for me. I look at my kind of weird career path, my moments of misery, the moments in the small business where I had no idea what I was doing. And it has all prepared me step by step to be in a job I love, that I think I will probably be at for a very long time, doing incredible legal work with people I like, a cause I believe in. And I feel incredibly blessed at sort of that jagged route from political science to social work to giving up 2 master's programs. I've just been amazed looking back at how I've been directed and prepared in a completely unexpected way. And so I think I probably need to wrap up so we have some time for questions. And I've sort of given advice throughout, as I've talked. Kind of want to leave you with just a few little tidbits to remember. And the first is be flexible and know that it's okay to be flexible. I started out thinking that I would be a social worker, that when I went to law school, I would work with victims of domestic abuse, family law. That's really where my interest started. And in a way, I've sold out to corporate America, but I've ended up in a position that's really good for me, following the opportunities that popped up. And so even though you may have sort of your career path mapped out, or even if you don't, know that that's okay, that you'll have opportunities. And it's great if you're flexible, I think you'll have more opportunities if you're willing to try things that are unexpected. Another little tidbit, and I've talked about this, is create your own opportunities. be willing to volunteer, be willing to pick up the phone and ask if people need internship help, or if there's an opening even for a weekend event. Go to conferences. People always say network, and I personally really struggle with that, partially because I've tried to network and I've been the focus of networking. And I think networking is hard, to walk into a room, hand someone your resume, and create a relationship where you can call them and essentially ask them for a favor. I've found that volunteering at conferences or attending conferences, internships, I volunteered at a crisis line where I actually met some other people that had interesting job opportunities. It's a better way to approach networking. As a quick example of networking failure, I was just sworn into the Utah bar, and there were probably 200 brand new attorneys that are taking the oath. And they all stand up, and then the in-house counsel attorneys stand up. I was the one, there were two in-house counsel attorneys, but you've got a target on your forehead because you have money from your corporation to pay these attorneys. So when I walked out of that room, I had 6 new attorneys waving business cards in my face. One of them stopped to ask what I did, what company I worked for. Most of them just said, "Oh, you're in-house counsel, I can help you," and handed me a card. To be honest, I don't have any of those cards. I don't know who any of those people are. If any of them were to call me to pitch business or ask for a favor, I'd have to tell them no. And so I think there are good ways to approach networking. A lot of it is build true relationships, be sincere. And I think something that we overlook in networking is be willing to pass it along. If you have a network, share it with your friends, share it with other people. Again, that's a way of developing relationships. It's sincere, and it helps other people out, and I really believe that that creates a synergy. And so rather than just saying network, I would encourage you to create real relationships and to create opportunities, and I think that you can do that. And I think my final advice is be in tune and have courage. I think there really were some low points in my life where I thought I'm never going to recover from this, and I think as we're in tune and we have courage, and really keeping the long-term perspective, I was very naive looking at my career potential. I thought I'm going to go to a big law firm, I'll be a partner, and it's just going to be, one straight line. It's been anything but a straight line. But in looking at if I'd known sort of in the long term that I would get where I needed to be, I think I would have been a lot less stressed and a lot less anxious about my career search. And so I would encourage you to keep in mind that you don't know what's going to happen in the long-term perspective and where you're headed, and that will help you be more flexible and open to other opportunities. So I think that's all I've got. There are a few minutes if any of you have questions. Yeah.
You mentioned that you found a life coach, and
Yes.
you could talk about how you made that decision and what that did for you specifically.
So I can't take all the credit for it. My law firm, as part of my severance package, said they'd pay for it. And so it was about a $6,000 coaching experience. I'm trying to remember how I found her. It was good in unexpected ways. I think she had a program that she actually worked with, and some of it you could probably find online if this sort of thing is interesting. I took personality tests, I took skill tests, and I take these tests, like Myers-Briggs color tests. I can't remember the name, it was a DISC something. I loved the personality test because it came back and made me start to think about my strengths, and it just reaffirmed I knew I was not a good law firm fit. Billing my life in 15-minute increments, my priorities were different. I wasn't willing to sacrifice family for professional success. And I think that really came through in the personality tests. And something she did that I think helped, because she didn't answer my questions. Really what she did is pose questions that helped me verbalize what I was thinking. And often a good friend can fill the same role. But she challenged me, because I would say things like, well, there's no way that I can go from being an employee benefits attorney to an international development guru. There's no way I can get there. And she would challenge that and say, well, of course you can. What do you need to do? Do you need to get more education? Do you need to talk to this person? Who could you talk to? It really was more of a coaching experience. It was not telling me the answers. It was asking questions and challenging my assumptions. to help me come to my own answers and to help me broaden my horizons. I think it actually did help. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but how do you feel about the BYU's like law school's like joint program with like JD and
Mm-hmm.
PA, things like that?
So I didn't actually do it, but I do have friends that did the MBA JD program. In retrospect, wow, I actually wish that I had done it. Sorry. A lot of what I'm doing now is working with senior management, and it's more on the business level. And I really think if you're interested in, for example, the CEO track, an MBA would be really useful. At this point, I've considered going back to do an executive MBA. A lot of it depends on what you want to do. And I know that's probably not helpful at the stage that you're in, but it adds another year. At the same time, after spending a lot of time working and at big firms, I don't know that I would rush to get through school. This may make your parents cringe if they're helping finance your education. But if I could do things differently, I would actually go back and do a little more. I'd do more internships. I would have done more foreign study abroads, partially because this is a very unique time in your life, and I think every experience you take on, whether it's a job or an internship or even more education, that is going to change your skill set. It'll bulk up your resume. It will change the people you know. I know a lot of MBA programs have actually started doing international seminars where you go with a group out of the country and actually do some hands-on consulting experience. Not only does that bulk up your resume, give you new skills, again, it helps you try things on and see if you like it. I think the more sort of factors you can have, the more data points to make a decision about what kind of career to pursue, the better off you'll be. So a lot of my law school colleagues, and at the time I was very focused. I wanted to get into school, I wanted to get out of school, get a job, make money. So I never considered it, but I actually do wish that I had. Wouldn't apply for everyone. If you know you're not interested in business, probably wouldn't do it. But I wish I had. Hope that helps. Yeah.
It sounds like you kept on looking for this door to international private law, international public law, wherever you were going, and it just never seemed to open for you.
Yes.
Why do you think that was, and how would you go about doing it differently?
Good question. There are still days I regret not being in international law. When I got to DC, I went to the State Department website, and I thought, I want to enroll in the State Department and be a Foreign Service officer. I love to travel. I've been to 40 countries because it's what I love. I am really convinced that I am where I need to be doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think it's possible that if I had maybe attacked that door a little harder, a little sooner, it might have opened, but I'm not sure that I would be happy. I have some friends that actually are in the Foreign Service as attorneys and just as Foreign Service officers, and I look at their lifestyle, that they're, every couple of years they pick up and move, they don't have the ongoing relationships, their families in some cases have suffered, not in all cases, but I think I was kind of saved from myself, and I think there is some courage in, again, being willing to be flexible and go a direction other than the one that you had planned or that you think will make you the happiest. But I also think there's great value to, if there is something that you want to do everything you can to make it happen. And I feel like I kind of got that opportunity when this small business job opened up. I got to get in and see what international development was. I know there are a lot of people that do true international development, but I've also seen the government side of it. And in my perspective, it wasn't what I thought it was. I think I was chasing a dream that I didn't really understand. And that is something, another law school plug. I would encourage you, if you are planning to go to law school, go sit in on some classes. Go talk to some professors. I have a handful of friends that dropped out of law school. They got there and thought, this isn't what I expected. It's not what I want. 3 years of your life is a big commitment if it's really ultimately not what you want. I think another interesting thing is I've kept in touch with my law school classmates. A lot of them are not practicing law. They've moved on from law firms to a lot of business opportunities. One scrapped law altogether, and he's a musician and actor. A lot of us have, and he's really good. Who knew? But I think a lot of us have moved away from the law firms, which is what we expected to do. A lot of in-house counsel, but a lot of people have left. And so before you make that commitment, make sure it's what you want, because I think it surprises people. It's kind of a rambling response, but any other questions? Looks like it may be time to cut you loose anyway. Okay, thanks.